webinar, Trends in Jewish Teen Giving, where we will look at the JTFN study, Just Teens, in more detail. I'm Danielle Siegel, JTFN's Program Manager, and I'm excited to introduce you to our presenter for today, Brianna Holtzman. Brianna started her work in the Jewish professional world in 2007 as the founding associate director for URJ Camp Kalsman outside of Seattle, Washington. Brianna is an alumna of the first cohort of the Foundation for Jewish Camps Yitro Leadership Program, a FJC Bildner Graduate Fellow, and a Ruske Fellow through UJA Federation of New York's Ruske Institute for Jewish Professional Leadership. Brianna earned her MBA from University of Washington with a focus on marketing and management, and received her BA in Law and Society from American University. Brianna now spends her days as the director for the Jewish Teen Funders Network in New York City. She sits on the steering committee for Present Tense's NYC Accelerator, Amplifier's Advisory Board, and the Sigma Delta Tau Foundation Board of Trustees. I'm sure you will join me in welcoming Brianna for today. So without further ado, let's get started. So for those of you who are new to this field, Brianna, can you please give an outline of Jewish teen philanthropy and this study?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm glad to have everyone on the call today. We're really excited to share some of the details from this survey of teen giving. I want to give just a little bit of background for people for whom Jewish teen philanthropy, the concept or field, might be new. And I recognize we have a lot of veterans on the call today, so we'll go through this pretty quickly. But big picture, Jewish teen philanthropy programs introduce teens to collective grant making. The group process is guided by Jewish values and provides teen philanthropists opportunities to gain new leadership skills. We believe, and I think you probably can voice this as well, that this early experience with strategic philanthropy both strengthens their engagement with Jewish life long-term and ensures their commitment to lifelong giving based on Jewish values. Our field at JTFN, we support two different types of programs. One is an individual giving model, which is the B'nai Tzedek program, and one is a Teen Foundation, which is a collective giving model. We're going to spend most of the time speaking today about the collective giving model, the Teen Foundation. Overall, programs in our network are for teens ages generally 13 to 18 or middle school and high school. To be a part of the network, we really want programs who are focused on using Jewish values and learning at the core of this grant making and giving. So if you know of a program and you're not sure if it's connected to our network, please get them in touch with us. We'd love to learn more about programs that are operating in similar veins who may not be connected to us yet. What we do know of our field is that it's kind of constantly evolving. We are always in conversations with organizations who are looking to bring in elements of Jewish teen philanthropy into their teen programming or into their curriculum. A quick snapshot of our field is that as of kind of the end of the summer, we knew we were supporting about over 100 programs, about 80 of which are teen foundations, and nearly 30 are B'nai Tzedek, the individual giving models. You see that there's a variety of host institutions and organizations that really support these programs. So it's interesting to know that you can adapt and evolve the giving experience for all sorts of different institutions. Everything from summer camps to federations and foundations, synagogues, JCCs, and other kinds of organizations. Geographically, we're also a pretty diverse field. We have you can see a big chunk of the fields in the it says northwest, pretty sure that should say northeast. So about a third of the field is in that geographic area, but then dispersed across West, Midwest, South, Canada, Israel, and Australia. And we're constantly growing and excited to think about how the model of giving can adapt given each community's customs, needs, and also how the culture of philanthropy can shape a generation and can shape, this generation can shape how giving is approached in other communities. So we'll get a little bit more to that towards the end of today. big picture, again, if you're familiar with the program or with Jewish Teen Philanthropy, we follow a pretty common curricular arc. Across those 108 programs, we know that there's quite a bit of variety in what happens inside of each session, but what we know is really consistent is that all of our programs take teens and guide teens through a grant-making process that starts with Jewish values clarification, understanding of text and Jewish giving, moves into teens collectively understanding what are shared values, what are shared areas of interest that they want to make change in their community or their world, and development of mission statements, working and learning about nonprofits and the ins and outs of grant making, working with real organizations to review proposals, visiting them, building consensus, making decisions, and granting real dollars to real organizations. We know that our programs are doing this on an ongoing cycle, and that just like giving, so our programs often see that teams continue on multiple times in the process, and that even outside of their experience in a teen foundation, what they're really building is a habit for lifelong Jewish giving. We know that these programs can happen, and as you saw, typically they happen over a calendar year or an academic year, but as you saw, there are some that are housed in summer camps or other institutions where the model can be varied. So that's a little bit about the big picture of the field. The survey itself, some of the background. The survey represents data from teen foundations only. So in this study, we were really looking at the giving from teen foundations and not at the individual giving level. We opened up a survey for anyone in the field to submit their demographic information, their mission statement, and the grants that they made this year. We had about 50 teen foundations, we had 50 teen foundations reply, which is about 2/3 of our teen foundation network. The demographic information, like I said, represents the 50 teen foundations, and what we know is that some programs and some organizations have one foundation that hosts multiple boards or multiple cohorts of grant makers. So what we learned is that across those 50 teen foundations, we were really looking at data from 95 different cohorts of teens who are collectively making decisions. And nearly 2,000 individual teens are represented in this study. Again, this is not a look at, this is not a statement about the size of the network or how many programs participate, because we know that we did not receive feedback from all of our community. You'll see some of the data as we get into it. You'll see a big cumulative number, and then as we break it down into different types of giving and start to look at the trends, it's important to note that some communities submitted just a total amount that they granted and didn't provide the breakdown. So as we look further into the study, you'll see that all percentages are based on the actual number of dollars that we had reported. I'm happy to answer any questions about that. So let's look at the survey a little bit. In 2015, 2016, that's the academic calendar year, so we're looking only at one cycle of programming here. We learned that teens granted $1,092,299. Over $1 million was granted by Jewish teens in the Jewish Teen Funders Network in the 2015 and 2016 year. This is a huge number, and I'm really excited to get into how they gave and where they gave and what that looks like. But this amount was split up over 383 grants, and we have detail on about 340 of them. One other thing that we found really interesting in our among our team is that in 2012, the giving data that we collected totaled about $760,000. We've seen a 44% increase in the number of dollars granted from Jewish teens in the JTFN network since 2012. So who responded? We had, this is what you can see on the screen. If you're calling in, you'll hear that we had about 13 federation programs, 9 foundation programs, 9 programs that were hosted in synagogues, 8 that were hosted in day schools, 6 from summer camps, and 3 that were hosted in JCC organizations, and 2 that were hosted in other kinds of organizations, whether that be a community network in and of itself, or a Bureau of Jewish Education, or a Jewish Family Service host. One thing that I found really interesting in this is that it is generally pretty representative breakdown of our fields, although I will note that federations and synagogues were a little bit underrepresented in the study. And so we can kind of guess a little bit about what that might mean for if we were to kind of guess forward or project what the total amount is. But just to know, all the numbers that we're sharing are real raw data that we have, not projections based on the percentages who submitted. Great. So let's take a look really geographically. Same thing, you'll see that geographically, again, we have the most come out of the Northeast, West, Midwest Canada, and the Southern area. So South is probably a little bit underrepresented. And just kind of interesting that there's a big geographical dispersion of our programs. Participants by grade level. So we take a look at, we ask all of our programs who submitted to submit their demographic information as well. What we saw this year is that there's kind of a spike in the 10th grade year. And that's really common. And in fact, that is really consistent with our 2013-2014 study. So that is kind of a disbursement. Some of our programs, like I noted, are one-year opportunities, so it might be housed, for example, in the 7th grade class at a day school, and some of our programs host multi-year opportunities, so you might be able to enter in grade 8 and continue all the way through grade 12 through different opportunities. We also took a look at the number of program hours that each of our team foundations who were submitting grants submitted. So we can see that there's a range of anywhere from 4 hours to 100 hours that are dedicated to these types of programs. What I think is really nice to see is that a great majority of our programs dedicate over 20 hours on this programming. And the average is actually just over 30 hours of programming. We find that the more time that is dedicated to this program, obviously the more in-depth teams can get in each component of the programming. In some programs, we actually find that teams are asking for more, which is not common in team programming. But certainly teams are seeing the value in the content and the depth of the content and the realness of this opportunity. And we'll speak a little bit more to that and team motivation in just a little bit. So again, $1,092,299 were granted this year. For just a moment, we're going to take a look at the breakdown of grant pool size and granting size. So a little bit of data about the grant making pool. Now this is a number, we received one number from each foundation that was submitted. So we're talking about 50 results here. The grant making pools, which is the total amount that teams had to make decisions on, ranged from $500 to $225,000. So it's a really, really big range. What you see though is that most of the average grant pool size is about close to $22,000, and $3,000 grant pool and $10,000 grant pools were our most common, with each appearing 4 times. So about 10% of our programs grant with $3,000, about 10% with $4,000, and then they're dispersed quite broadly. The and we take a look at the individual grants, and you break down, because what we find is that each program gets to make decisions about their grant making pool, and they're often encouraged to consider multiple kinds of grants. For those of you working in the field, you know that the recommendations are often made by teams to the organizations that are submitting proposals with a recommended kind of maximum grant amount, and that's determined so that teams can consider granting to multiple organizations that are meeting their mission. While we say generally that the amount of money that is granted is not the most important, but that it's real dollars granted to real organizations, we also know that the kinds of proposals that teams are able to consider do change based on the kinds of grant proposals they get. So if they're considering proposals at $500, the kind of impact scale of their work might be different than if they're looking at grants of $5,000. So taking a look at the individual grants, what we see is that grants range everywhere from $50 to $19,000. So big difference there. On average, the individual grant size was about $3,000. And the most common grant that we saw was $5,000, and that occurred 32 times. We know there are about 340 grants accounted for, and so you can see that anything that shows up 32 times is a good percentage of the total amount, but that, again, just like the grant making pools are very distributed, so is the scale of individual grants. That's kind of a look at how that $1,092,000 breaks up, and a little bit about how the programs are dispersed across our network and across the giving, just for this 2014-2015 year.
Great, thanks so much, Brianna, for sharing those findings with us. So including in the study, there is a list of different values that are common in Jewish Teen Foundation mission statements. How do those manifest into the top 5 grant themes that we see that are listed on the study as well, with social justice being the top category for the previous academic year?
Yeah, absolutely. So what you see, just a breakdown of the kind of the missions of how we even get to this place, I think is important. We spoke about the mission statement process, and for those in the field, you know that this is really the core Jewish values, kind of a core piece of exploring Jewish values for teens, and understanding the difference between your own personal values and collective values. So what we saw in terms of the grants that came out were that you're seeing on your screen the top 5 grant areas. We saw grants that went to social justice causes, to education, to Jewish identity, to children and youth, and to poverty. But we also know that there were over 200 additional grants that were granted in many, many different categories. What we see in the mission statement process is that teams are starting this individual exploration, and they're naming things like saving a life or building community or repairing the world as individual values. And when they come together, they're learning about understanding how to use their own personal values to collect, and then collectively understanding how some of that might change when you're working with a group of people. The other really interesting thing that we see coming out of the mission statement is that there's a really direct line to those top 5 issue areas. So something like upholding human dignity might turn into what we coded as social justice grants. And an important, I think, distinction about social justice is that this is a new category that we've seen this year. This came out of taking a look at the mission statement and the grant descriptions that were provided to us. And when we talk about social justice giving, what we're talking about is helping at the root of a problem, of looking at systemic change. And I think something that's very nuanced in the team giving that we've seen this year is that there was a lot of attention on changing systems and also on helping immediate need. So when you see things that are very consistent from past years, like education, youth and children, and poverty, that is largely, those grants were largely immediate need or helping people right now, whereas the social justice grants were all things that went to organizations looking to change systems. And that was something that came out new from the study that we did 2 years ago, was more emphasis on that area. Just to take a look at other kinds of things, I said that there were 200 other grants that were not in one of those top 5 categories, or that were not in the social justice, education, Jewish identity, poverty, or youth and children. So you can see there's quite a range. Things like special needs, families, arts, healthcare, homelessness. There's a huge range in what teams today are looking to have their impact on. And one thing that I think is important to note in this section is that this past year when we just collected and asked organizations to list kind of the issue and the people that they're being served. And many of the grants that were given actually overlapped into multiple categories, both those who are being served, like youth and children, and an area like homelessness, for example. So what we're seeing is both the issue and a narrowing down of who of those being served in the population. So the one thing that I think is kind of, we talked about trends of a new social justice trend. We said that youth, poverty, and education were consistent from year to year. One thing that I think is interesting to note is that we had nearly 3 times as many grants that were coded as Jewish identity programming. And we'll dive into a little bit about why we think that might be the case from our team giving towards the end of the slide. But I think just that shift was also really interesting as kind of an area of growth.
Great. Oh, that's very interesting. You were talking a little bit about some of the trends that have come about. Can you speak a little bit more about those trends that we've been seeing over the past few years?
Yeah, absolutely. So, okay, we sliced the data in a couple of different ways, and you saw some of these data points on the study itself. In 2015, 2016, what you can see is that about 23% of the grant dollars went to Jewish organizations serving anyone in the community. About 42% of the grant dollars, which is $436,000, went to Jewish organizations that specifically served the Jewish community, and 35% of those dollars went to secular organizations, so not organizations that are not specifically Jewish. Generally, those are organizations that are serving anyone. Want to take a minute to compare that to what it looked like 2 years ago when we last did the study. What we saw 2 years ago was that 18% of went to Jewish organizations serving the whole community. That's in contrast to this year's 23%. That 40% went to Jewish organizations serving the Jewish community, in contrast to this year's 42%. And that 42% went to secular organizations in comparison to this year's 35%. So that actually shows a great shift and was something that we were really interested in. There's an increase in both of the categories around Jewish organizations, and actually a slight decrease in secular organizations. So we thought that was interesting. I wanted to dive into that a little bit more to explore what that looked like. So this next chart that you're seeing, if you're on the screen and if you're calling in, I'll do my best to describe, is a comparison of the last survey data that we did and this year's. Historically, we've done this data collection every 2 years. So the last set of data that we have is from the 2013-2014 academic year. In that year, $551,000 was granted to Jewish organizations cumulatively. That's combining Jewish organizations serving the Jewish community and Jewish organizations serving all. This year, we found that $675,000, over $675,000 went to that category. And that is an increase of, as you know, over $100,000. And one of the greatest shifts that we've seen here is in the category of Jewish organizations serving all. We had a couple of ideas about why that might be, and it's been one of the most common questions that's been asked to us following the release of this data is like, why is this change happening? I think there's a number of reasons. I think each of the local communities could probably speak to the trends that they're seeing in their teams and in their team interests. But I will note some of the changes that have happened in the field that we know of, and ones that we think might have an impact on specifically this kind of giving. It also may have an impact on things like the number of program hours and other components that we've seen shifts in this year. One is that the field continues to grow and to evolve, and teams are, like I said, are looking for real deep experiences. But the programs that have been most successful in our field are ones that are always looking to deepen their programming. And in fact, at JTFN, we've launched in the past couple of years an initiative to introduce new high touch and high investment programs into the field. And those programs are benefiting from learning from best practices of programs from years past. And I think what we see across our programs is that there is a focus on Jewish values and then really responding to the fact that teens are seeking more hours in this kind of programming, more opportunity to engage in conversation. And I think that programs like our Foundation Board Incubator have injected a higher level of Jewish identity programming into the field at large. And what we're seeing is that they're learning both from programs already in existence and vice versa. Some of our lower touch programs have the opportunity to learn from and use resources that have been developed through that initiative. The other thing I think to note is that these programs are getting more and more well-known in their communities. And Jewish organizations locally are more connected to Jewish teen philanthropy programs and are more likely to submit really high quality proposals to these teams, understanding that this is an educational and Jewish identity building program. Even if they don't get the grant dollars at the end of the process, they know that a high quality application or proposal will really benefit teams in their community. Sometimes what we see is that Jewish organizations in a local community or global community are more likely to respond to a Jewish teen philanthropy group. There are secular youth philanthropy programs that operate all over the world, and I think understanding and knowledge of the kind of grants that they're making might attract different kinds of organizations. The one thing that I also think I want to kind of name is reflective of something that came out of the Jewish Education Project's Generation Now study. And one of their talking points was that teens are feeling proud, not special, about their Judaism. I think the reflection and the growth in giving to Jewish organizations serving all is a real reflection of that. Being Jewish is seen in a positive light, but it's a generation that's not about drawing lines, about being in or being out, but having their Jewish identity guide and shape who they give to and how they act, but knowing that they really are a part of a broader community. I think that there's a discomfort around isolation, and that Jewish teams want to be seen as helping all, but have a real pride with their Jewish identity. And I think that's why we're seeing giving to Jewish organizations that are serving all, as well as Jewish organizations serving the Jewish community, which is a reflection of their own experience. One of the last things I want to share just kind of about the breakdown of grants is the geography that we saw. Local giving this year was about 60% of the grant making, and that is exactly on par with what we saw last time. So local giving consistently and remains a priority. When we talk with teens and we learn, you'll hear a little bit more about that in a little bit, you know, we recognize that this experience is a hands-on, real experience. And I think local giving rises to the top because it reinforces that hands-on nature. Teens are able to give where they can see outcomes. They're able to really meet and engage with organizations. Easy proximity for site visits. As some programs do have parameters about their giving, both around giving to Jewish organizations versus secular organizations, and giving geographically, I think it's important to note that there are many programs that have a parameter that require some amount of local giving. So it's definitely important to note that. And I think that what we have seen is that we saw a little bit of an increase in giving to Israeli organizations, and I think that's also tied to the ongoing kind of knowledge of our field and of teen foundations, and learning how to be, how to present better and how to connect better across many, many miles. And so taking some of the distance away, I think has been a priority, and probably has shown has been an indicator of some of that growth in Israeli organizations.
Great, thanks for that deeper dive into some of those trends that we've been seeing. And what do these trends signal for you in the field and for those who work with Jewish teens and or in philanthropy?
Yeah, listen, a few things. I think one thing that's really important to note is that this study is a snapshot in time. This is a look at 1 year's giving. Now, we are really excited to be able to compare to years past, and are looking forward to collecting data for years future to be able to keep tracking and to keep understanding how teens are growing up and the decisions they're making are shaped by their ongoing experiences, and how these experiences will shape their future. As you know, as we all know, we work at this intersection of philanthropy and Jewish education and teens. And I think that there's a few big takeaways that we've been exploring. One is, and is so important just to note, that collective Jewish teen giving increases each year. This year, teens granted over $1 million, and that's huge. And that's something that is really important to recognize, that even for a teen foundation that granted $500 or made a grant of $1,000 to a local organization, they feel great about what they're doing and are amazed when they understand that they're part of a bigger collective movement. I think it's interesting to think about, I mentioned that there are secular teen philanthropy programs. I think it's really shouldn't go without missing the beat that teens are specifically choosing to participate in a Jewish program. There are giving opportunities for teens outside of our movement, but that teens are opting into programs that allow them to explore their Jewish identity and understand how this is an exercise in giving, an exercise in Jewish education and Jewish identity exploration, and they're specifically choosing programs with this Jewish lens. So that's a real great signal for, I think, how this field is engaging Jewish teens. Both in the Generation Now study and in a recent Ernst & Young study, we saw that this is a generation that wants to be empowered and engaged with change making. They are the generation who see the problems in the world and want to be involved in that. They see themselves as global citizens, yes, but they see themselves as Jewish global citizens. Teens today have so many multi-layered experiences that make up who they are, and at the core of that is their Jewish identity. That again is reflected in the growth in giving to Jewish organizations year over year. And I think one thing that came out of the Ernst & Young study that is really interesting, that the study they put out in 2015 was called "What if the next big disruptor isn't a what but a who?" And one thing that they noted about this generation, they called Generation Z, in comparison to the millennials, which are now no longer teens, is that this cohort was more focused on what they were doing to help improve the world. They seem to feel more of a personal obligation to help make things better. And that is something that we're really seeing in these programs, is that teens are able to understand what change they want to see and see this as a real way to make that change. The last thing that I just want to note is not necessarily a trend that comes out of our study, but is an opportunity that comes out of the Ernst & Young study. And that is a data point that shows that 93% of parents say their children influence family spending and household purchases. 93% of parents say that their children influence how they spend their money. This is a huge opportunity. If our teens in this network are able to very closely link their values and into a mission statement and their values to causes that they want to see change in, we are continuing to think about how that might influence their parents and the generations actually who came before them, and might strengthen the bonds of giving. So while teens today are developing their habits of giving, they're also strengthening that across generations. And I think that the opportunity to think about for all of our programs how parents are involved in some way in their children's experience, and in how the teens can bring back their experience and shape what happens inside their household when it comes to Jewish giving, is a really huge opportunity. We're constantly exploring that opportunity, and I think I mentioned that we have initiatives to launch new programs, and we're seeing that this field is always evolving. So for those of you on the call who are currently leading programs, you'll have the opportunity to stay on and to discuss how some of this data and trends might shape the work that you're doing in the future. For those of you who are joining us from outside of the field and who may not be hands-on practitioners of this work, I really encourage you to be in touch with us to talk about how we might think about working with you to bring new programs like this into your community organization or community at large. I think that this study is very encouraging. We're really excited to see some of the shifts, and are really aware that that this is a moment in time, and I imagine that as we look towards the future of giving, that we'll start to see more of how teens' day-to-day experiences are really shaping the action that they're taking and the giving that they're doing in the world.
Great. Thank you so much, Brianna, for that background and giving us a lot to think about. I'm going to open up the floor for some question. You can type your question into the chat box to me, Danielle. And while some questions are coming in, I want to ask Alana, our program associate, to share some of our insights from the teen perspective. As many of you know, the JTFN launched a Youth Ambassadors Council this past year to bring the teen voice closer to our work. Alana works with this group of teens and gave the council a sneak peek of the study to get their perspective. Alana, can you share a little bit about what surfaced from those conversations?
Absolutely. Thank you, Danielle. So the council is actually made up of teens from 10 different programs spread across our network. And as you mentioned, we shared the study, a preview of the study with the group and heard some of their reactions. And one of the things that I really heard strongly in that meeting was the importance of giving back to the local community. One member shared that she valued being able to see the impact of her foundation's giving and knowing that it really made a difference in the community she lived in. There was also this sense of understanding. The impact was also echoed by a participant who spoke about giving back to the Jewish community. He really took to heart Hillel's, "If I'm not for myself, who will be for me?" And it's clear that giving to Jewish organizations was a huge priority to him that will sustain him through his life. But the thing that I found really interesting in speaking with the teens was that they had no idea about the scope of their impact. they were really taken by surprise and moved by the fact that there was this bigger community that they were part of. And they were really moved about finding out how they were part of that collective impact, and where their money was going, really.
Great. Thank you so much for that insight into our Youth Ambassadors Council and some of the team's opinions about the study. Thank you. So I have a question here for Brianna. Where does the granting pool money come from? Are there different ways that each organization kind of handles that process?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. Where does this $1 million come from? A variety of sources. So we see everything from teams in a community being entrusted to grant on behalf of a community foundation or organization, where they're entrusted with a section of the foundation's grant making pool. We also see that teams, some programs have teams contribute their own dollars to it, to a grant making pool, and some programs have teams go out and fundraise and work within their local community to raise funds. One thing that is for sure is that teams' involvement and understanding of the responsibility of the grant making pool is really important. So in the programs where they're entrusted with dollars, they work hand in hand, or they have the opportunity to connect with the board members of that organization to understand the responsibility of granting. And extra work is done to make sure that they understand, the teams themselves, the mission and vision of that host organization, so that they feel like they have skin in the game. They're taking that host organization's mission and putting their own kind of spin and lens to it, so that teams are personally invested. And we see that personal investment come from programs where teams contribute themselves, their own dollars, or do fundraising where they're bringing in supporters from their community. Having some kind of personal attachment to the grant making elevates the process and places a little bit more weight onto the decision making.
Great, thanks so much. Another question for you. In the programs, is there any education done regarding potential recipients from organizations? So is there an examination of the nonprofits, which ones are going to be the most effective versus another one? So kind of, is there any education about where those grant dollars end up?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that is a core part of the grant making process. Teams are learning not only about what is a nonprofit, but then also as they review real proposals from these organizations, they're looking at everything from what's the project that this funding will help support, what's the budget of this organization, how do they spend their money. They are asking questions about partnerships. Is this organization working with another organization? They use resources like GuideStar or Charity Navigator to research the organizations that they're learning from or that they're considering granting to. And most of our programs find huge value and find that site visits are a big component of the program. The site visit is a real visit to the organization that they're considering granting to, and it's not a volunteer visit. It's not that there's anything wrong with that kind of a visit, but it's not going to sort food at a food pantry. It's going to meet with the leadership of that food pantry in their community and understand how they work, what the money will go towards, what challenges they're facing. Teams are really considering everything from what kind of an impact might this grant have, and also is this organization going to be dependent on this grant, and if so, is it responsible to grant to them in this scale if we can't ensure that we're going to sustain that kind of giving. So they're really learning at a deep level about how their giving influences the organizations they give to. And I think on the hard copy of this study, we said transforming tzedakah into grant making. And tzedakah is this act of giving, and we really take pride in the fact that our programs are putting an extra layer of strategy and of sophistication to their giving and really transforming it into a strategic grant making.
Great. Thank you for clarifying that process for us. And thank you also for everyone for your questions and your thoughts. And I hope this study was a useful tool for you and that it gained you some extra insight into the field. And unfortunately, we have run out of time, but if you have any other questions, please feel free to contact us. You can even type them in the chat box now. We'll make a note of the questions and we will get back to you offline as well. Or you can email us too. A big thank you to Brianna for walking us through the study and allowing us to kind of dig a little deeper into that. So thank you. If your community is thinking of starting a program and you don't have one yet, we're here to help. Contact us for a consultation, or you can check out our wide range of resources that are available on our website. So for those of us who are leaving us now, have a really great day, and thank you for joining. For those program leaders who are staying for part 2, we're just going to take a quick 2 to 3 minute stretch break. So we will begin part 2 at 1:48, and that's Eastern time. And we will reconvene back here and continue on with our conversation. So thank you so much. And I look forward to seeing the program leaders for part 2.